Welcome, geeks, to another exciting episode of Rockin The Code World with dotNetDave. I'm Dave McCarter. I'm glad you're here. And we have an exciting show today. I'm excited about, well, I'm excited about all my shows. I totally lost my train of thought already. Anyway, my guest today is Steve Jones from Redgate Software. We all know Redgate. We've been using their stuff for a long time. I was just thinking about Redgate, and they make Reflector, if I'm not wrong, and Reflector is the disassembly tool that I use, especially now that they took the disassembler out of CodeRush, which I'm kind of sad about. But anyway, we still got Reflector, and Reflector's always been like the tool to disassemble .NET code, and I use it a lot actually sometimes. So. This is show 53, if I didn't say it before, and I'm glad you're all here. Put in the chat, what you guys are up to, what country you're from, and also don't forget, Steve's a database expert. We're going to be talking about databases and DevOps and things like that, so make sure you put your questions in now so you can get them answered. If you put them at the very end, probably not going to get answered, so put them in now. So anyway, come on, screen, you can go. So, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine is still going on. So some pretty bad stuff happened this week, and I'm pretty sad about that. One good thing to report, I don't think I reported this last week. I did get in touch with the last person that I was trying to get a hold of there that I know from when I spoke in the Ukraine back in 2015. So I'm glad everybody I know there is doing okay, and I'm sure it's still difficult being in Ukraine because they're all still in Ukraine. They didn't flee, so they didn't leave the Ukraine. So I hope they stay safe. I hope everything goes better, and I hope you all send your support one way or the other to everybody in Ukraine, and especially everybody in Ukraine who's lost a loved one there. Tragic. So until the war is over, I'm going to talk about the Ukraine every week. So that's what I'm going to do. Anyway, if you didn't know, it hasn't been widely publicized yet, but I'm actually going to Australia in June to speak for the first time since COVID hit. So like the first time in over 2.5 years. I'll be going to Australia in June. So those are the dates I'll be there. I'll be there in June 20th to 24th. Actually, a little bit longer because I'm coming in on the weekend and leaving on the weekend. And I'll be speaking at NDC Melbourne on the 23rd. So if you live in Australia or know somebody who lives in Australia, I hope you'll let them know that I'll be there. I'm also trying to speak at a user group there. I'm in the works for that right now. So speaking of that, if there are any user groups and things like that in Australia that want me to come speak while I'm there, let me know. Get in touch with me like ASAP, because if you don't live in Melbourne, I'm going to have to change my flight arrangements, which I haven't done, which I am doing this coming week. So if you want me to come speak while I'm there, it'll be my first time ever visiting Australia. I've been wanting to go there ever since I was in my 20s. It's a longer story, but anyway, I'm really excited not only to go to a country I've been wanting to go to for a very long time. I'm excited about, learning more about Australia and visiting the different places in Australia. And I'm excited about speaking. I miss speaking so much. I was just telling Simon, I'm kind of worried that, I haven't spoken, in person in 2.5 years, and I'm getting a little bit of anxiety. So. Which is not normal for me. So anyway, that's in June. So if you're in Australia, I hope to see you at NDC. Or if you're in the area, let me know and let's go grab lunch or happy hour or something. I've got a whole week to kill, and only one day I'll be speaking. So with also version 6 of Spargene is out. Spargene is my open source project that I've had one way or the other for a very long time. I'm working on the .NET 6 version right now, so the current version is .NET 5, which is still good, but I'm doing a lot of changes to the .NET 6 version, breaking changes. So it's taking me a little bit longer to get that done, but I'm working on it as hard as I can. With that, I want to bring on my guest, Steve Jones. Steve has 30 years of experience working in databases, software, having worked in a variety of industries during that time. He's been a developer, a DBA manager in different organizations. Steve is the founder and editor of SQL Server Central, a community dedicated to helping data professionals improve their skills. He works for Redgate and works with customers in pre- and post-sales roles. Steve is also one of the founders of SQL Saturday franchise, which I've spoken at before, and is currently the president and charitable foundation that manages SQL Saturday. Steve is also a 14-year, sorry, Steve, a 14-year Microsoft data platform MVP. So welcome, Steve.
Thank you very much for having me. I have a lot of gray for 14 years old.
I know. Well, the longer the bio, the better chance I'm going to screw it up. So,
yeah,
that's, the 2-sentence bios are the ones I like.
Yeah,
because there's less chance I'll mess it up.
well, sorry about that. I'll shorten it up. I'm jealous.
Okay.
You get to go to Australia. That's very cool. Very exciting.
I know.
Melbourne is a great place.
I've been I won't tell the story live, but I've wanted to go there since I used to be in the Navy, and I did one Westpac where I got to go to Japan and Singapore and Hong Kong and Guam and a bunch of other places like that, and Philippines, and one of the places we were supposed to go was Australia, and at the last minute they diverted us to Africa, and I was kind of sad about it. We were all kind of sad about that because we're all really looking forward to going at Australia. So I ever since then I've had this thing in the back of my head. Okay, I didn't get to go then, but I need to go at some point. So I've been trying to speak at NDC in Australia for many years, and so they finally picked me up.
Well, so good. Congratulations. You'll enjoy it. I was lucky enough to go there a few years ago. That we have an office in Brisbane, and so I went to Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney. And so Melbourne actually has a great museum of some sort, but they had a 60s music and revolution display in there. I don't know if it's still there, but it was very cool, right? With the Beatles and Hendrix and Woodstock and all this stuff. So you might enjoy that.
Oh, anything music, I'll be there.
Yeah.
I'll start looking up concerts before I go too, to see if I can go to a concert. Like I was just doing that today. I was next month I'm going to the first time to my new job, which is headquartered out of Salt Lake. And I was looking on the bands in town app this morning going, okay, what concerts can I see? I'll be there a week. What can I see while I'm there?
Good. Yeah, I love music too. We actually just booked the Winter Park Jazz Festival for June. We're going to go up there for a couple of days. So
cool. Yeah, I used to do photography for a jazz band here. And a lot of people think I only like rock or heavy metal, and that's not true at all. I like all kinds of music, mostly. And,
maybe we could change that intro somewhere to be something else. You guys play something else?
Well, I don't know. Rock is my love, man. I've loved rock music since I've been a little kid. Jumping up and down on my bed, entertaining my brother doing air guitar with a doing air guitar with a tennis racket. I actually have a picture of that.
Nice.
Me doing air guitar in front of my brother when I was like, I don't know, I had to be like 6 or 7, I think.
All right. So before we get to databases and stuff, first concert.
Oh, first concert, Kiss.
Wow. So you're my age. So that was my second concert. I actually saw Andy Gibb as my first concert.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Kiss, a Cheap Trick opening for Kiss. That was my very first concert. And wow, what a way to start.
Yeah.
And I ended up my son still tells stories about this, where I ended up taking my son to see Kiss on their first reunion tour back in the early 2000s. And so that was he really enjoyed that. That kind of blew his mind, as far as all the craziness that used to happen back then during concerts, with fire breathing and breaking guitars and,
Yeah.
all that blood spitting, craziness that Kiss does. Yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why Mahesh asked me, for at least 2 of the times I've been in India, to smash the guitar at to play guitar in front of the audience and then smash the guitar and throw the pieces out in the audience, rock star style.
It's an expensive trick.
Yeah, well, we smashed a cheap Indian knockoff guitar, not a real one. And there's no way I'd bring one of my guitars and smash it. My guitars are too expensive to do something like that too.
Yeah. Well, cool.
Yeah. So you're from Denver?
I live in Denver. I'm from the East Coast actually, but I've been here 23 years now. So I love Denver. It's a wonderful place to live.
Yeah, I was there speaking at the Code Camp. I did the keynote of the Code Camp there. I don't know. I'm not sure how long ago that was. It wasn't too long ago. I'm drawing a blank what year I was there, but yeah, I spoke at the Code Camp there once. Microsoft flew me up there to do the keynote there, I guess, or something, or the conference did. I don't know. I can't remember who paid for what. But you just went to a conference, right?
I did. I went to SQL Bits in London, and it was the first. Well, I haven't been to SQL Bits, I think, in 4 or 5 years. So it was one of the first events I've done live in the last 2 years plus. So that was exciting to go there, and it was close to 1,000 people live in there. A little spread out, a little subdued. People are still a little careful, but it's getting better. I was at Dev Intersection in December, and it was still, that felt very quiet, very small. Yeah. So we'll see how it goes. I actually have a number of things booked here the next few months. I go to Belgium for Technorama next month, and then I go to Data Grilling in Germany, and then VS Live in Austin here. So I've got a bunch of stuff booked, and to me, things are opening back up, and I'm excited to get back out there and go. And hopefully, I'll get to Australia somewhere this year. We'll do something with Redgate, and then we have the Past Data Community Summit coming up in Seattle in November, and I'm hoping Ignite also goes live, and things get back to 2019.
Yeah.
The aim, I think.
Well, as we kind of find our new normal, right? That's what I think we're trying to find now. I was telling Steve and Simon before the show started that I got my second booster shot yesterday. So I'm all immune up, ready to speak somewhere. But, the problem is, the conferences are slowly coming back, and I think the people probably slowly be coming back too. I'm sure there's less people at these places just because of what's been going on, and they're kind of maybe a little bit worried about going into a packed space like that for a long period of time.
Yeah, I mean, I think there definitely are, but it's changing rapidly. I think as Denver, we've walked the line, or Colorado, pretty well of opening and closing, and slowly as we've opened up really across the last year, it seems like people start to get used to the risk factor, right? You can assess whether it's good for you or not good for you. And we start to become more comfortable shaking hands or saying hi, or at least just being inside of a building with each other. So I'm looking forward to more events this year. And I think for sure 2023 will probably look like 2019 again. Yeah.
So we're at, I know this is way off topic, but at SQL Bits, were people actually shaking hands yet?
Oh, absolutely.
We're still doing the elbow bump thing,
So the interesting thing about the pandemic changes is that we now just ask, right? Like can we shake hands? And because people have different levels of tolerance, whether they're wearing a mask or not, just asking the question. And some people want to do the elbow bump. Some people will shake hands. Got plenty of hugs from friends and things. And, I think we've learned how to better assess our own individual risk. And so there are certainly people that are worried, and there are certainly people that are not, and everything in between. Yeah. And so it felt fairly normal, just a little bit quiet.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.
Yeah. I haven't been around a large group yet. So, it's not really, I mean, not like a concert kind of thing, or a concert, not a concert, a conference kind of thing, or a user group kind of thing. No. I mean,
Yeah.
the largest group I've been in, with lately has been in the airplane. This is about it.
Right. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how Australia goes opening up, because I know they've been more conservative. So
yeah, they've been really. I mean, they get a couple cases, they lock down the entire freaking country.
Right.
New Zealand too. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think they've done better than we have as far as that's concerned.
Yeah.
I'll find out when I get there, but
yeah, for sure.
It seems like that, right?
Yeah, you'll have to post some videos, some shows, or talk about it when you get back.
Oh yeah. I just remembered that's where AC/DC is from. One of my favorite bands. AC/DC is from Australia, so they don't live there anymore. But yeah. Okay. So, well, let's get down to what we're here for. I guess I could talk about anything all day anyway. Music. Yeah. If you get me started music, there's no end. You're gonna have to slap me to. Oops. Sorry, Will Smith. I forgot about that.
There we go.
No slapping.
No slapping.
So welcome, Deepak. I hope when I come to India next to smash the guitar, maybe later this year. If you want me to smash the guitar, then you need to start tweeting Mahesh right now, so he can hook that up. Tweet Mahesh. Go. I want to see dotNetDave smash the guitar again, and see how many people do that. Because it's a bit of work to do that. So I don't think he wants to go through that unless there's a demand, I think. So today we're going to talk about database DevOps. We can talk more about SQL Saturday is one of the things you put on the list, and also branding yourself, I think, for a new job, which I just started a new job. So that should be an interesting topic. So everybody on the call right now, let us know what you want to talk about. But what do you kind of want to talk about first, Steve?
Why don't we talk some DevOps, right? Because you're a developer. I assume you do some DevOps stuff, maybe with the Sparging. Yeah. Do you have that set up?
A little bit, yeah. On that, right now, my CI builds don't work up because there's some file IO stuff I haven't been able to figure out how that exactly works, up in GitHub. So. It all works on my machine, but right. And it's failing unfortunately on GitHub. But
so that's a common problem, right? Like you and I are older. We've been building software a long time, and we've always had that it works on my machine, and I don't know why it doesn't work on the server or on your machine or whatever thing. And a long time ago, I started to write. I was successful in my career, like I'm sure you were. We started to find techniques to become better software developers, right? Mm-hmm. We learned about standards, we learned about automation, we learned about a lot of things that just were good habits. And so I think a lot of that stuff that we have been doing for 30 or 40 years ourselves is kind of become codified under this DevOps name idea. And it's really just good practices, but it hasn't been a part of the database for a long time, where the database is difficult because we maintain state in the database, right? Like you can, just edit classes, you can drop methods and add new methods and do all kinds of stuff in application software. But if I drop a table, customers get upset, right?
Yeah.
So there's been this huge challenge. And I think early on I came to Denver in like 1999, and we were trying to do, this startup thing and trying to rapidly adjust our software. And our goal was to release software every single week. Okay. And so at the time we had, I think I had like 12 developers doing Cold Fusion stuff. And I was the one database person trying to support them. And in trying to release software every week, it was a challenge, right? Like it's a huge challenge, right? We would adopt Agile. We did a lot of these things early on. And I had to learn how to build better practices and really how to automate things. So it used to be when I started that every Wednesday I would work and then I would go home to have dinner with my family, and I would go back to work at 8 p.m. so we could release software.
Oh, man.
Right. So me and a couple of developers would show up, and, I'd make a bunch of database changes. They would make a bunch of Cold Fusion changes, and then we would, cross our fingers and turn things live. And then if it wasn't working, we'd try to fix it. And it's just a mess. And at the time I had an infant, a toddler. And so it was a pain, right? I was tired of this stuff. So we worked hard to build process and some automation stuff so that we could release software every week reliably. And back then, everything was a manual tool, kind of like think about, right, using VB script, using some of the old Unix utilities, command line utilities to move bits around. But we got to the point over 18 months where instead of going to work, we would get on a call at 9 p.m. and I would run one command and it would release all these database changes. And then my partner would run another command and release all this Cold Fusion stuff, basically just copies. And then we would go to bed, right? And we went from, an hour or two of releasing software to a few minutes, really. And it taught me a lot about why having a good process and a good flow made sense. At that job, we released Wednesday, but really our sprints were Monday to Friday. So Monday morning was planning, right? Developers would work. I would support them all week long. Friday evening was cutoff. And then Monday morning QA got bits that they could test for 2.5 days. And usually Tuesday night, we would just make a go, no go thing, right? Decide what goes, what doesn't. But we learned how to kind of bundle things. And so at Redgate, we've spent about 12 years now trying to bring that stuff to the database and make it smoother so that you don't have to be an expert, or you don't depend on Steve or Dave being ready to work Wednesday night, right? If you go to Australia or I go on holiday, somebody else can still release software. And that's a lot of what DevOps is just trying to codify our knowledge, put it into a process with automation and just smooth it out. And so I've spent 12 years now helping Redgate build tools and work with customers and do research and all that stuff to kind of smooth out the process of releasing databases, because it's still not simple and it's not easy, but it's gotten better for sure.
Yeah. Well, databases always have been, to me, a really big pain point, right? And I know Microsoft has tried things in the past, like, they used to have the database project in Visual Studio that kind of helped, with the maintenance of the tables and the queries and things like that. And then, there's some things you can do with NED framework, which I think is pretty cool, but I don't know how well that really scales. So I was trying to talk and think of my question at the same time. That's never good when you get older, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I know there's, if we get to talk about document-based databases, we can talk about that. But so, what's kind of like, you probably will mention the Redgate tool, of course, but, what is kind of like the best way to maintain, the state of the database, not the state, but the metadata of the database and the store procedures. And so that way you can easily not only, make changes, but, replicate databases quickly for, when you do dev builds and QA builds and things like that. Yeah.
So there's a lot of different things in there, right? Like part of it tooling, I think, is just critical, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be Redgate tooling, but I do think, right, whether you're using something Microsoft provides or Redgate or some other company, it's really important, because when you work with databases, you start to realize just how much stuff you hand off to a compiler that you don't have to manage, right? So like when you build classes, right, with methods and properties and stuff, you don't care really about any ordering in the compile, right? You just send a project, which is, 100 classes and all the associated stuff into a compiler, and it builds a dependency tree.
Right.
It does object resolution. It does token replacement. It does all the stuff we expect, and then produces an end result that works. And in the database world, we don't really have a compiler to do that, right? Like we have the equivalent of compiling every method or every class, which sounds insane, right? If you think about it, right?
Yeah.
And if I told you had to compile classes in a certain order, you would think that's nuts.
Yeah.
Right. And more importantly, if I told you that when you defined a class, you used one set of syntax, and if you altered that class later, you'd use a different set of syntax, you would think I was just completely nuts. Right. But that's what we do in SQL or in a lot of database platforms. And it's just crazy to me that SQL is an incredibly broken language, and we haven't fixed it
Right.
after 40
I know.
years, 50
I
years,
know.
right? Really, I think tooling is important, and then I hate to say it, right, but some of it is just knowledge of understanding that tables are a stateful thing that is completely different than anything else we do in computer science.
Right.
So any type of procedural based programming, right, with functions and stuff, object programming with classes and methods and properties and things, and then stored procedures, functions, views are all code where we can grab a previous version or a new version, we can destroy them, recreate them with relatively little problem in terms of what we're doing. Certainly the permissions sometimes in the database will get a little bit funny there, but in general, that's just code. But tables have state, and so we have to think about them and treat them differently because we can't destroy them and recreate them. Unlike you create an instance of an object and then you destroy it and create a new instance and everything. We can't do that with tables. So it becomes a real challenge.
Right.
There's really two ways of doing this, right? One is a stateful method, kind of like a desired state configuration, or what a lot of people call the SQL Compare Method, right? Right. You make a bunch of changes and then you run this tool and it says, okay, here's what actually has to happen.
These are the differences, right?
These are the differences.
And create a script for you, right?
And create that script. The problem is that there's a lot of kind of happy path stuff that we do, right? Like I add a column, I create an index. There's a bunch of happy path stuff that works perfectly for. But there are a class of problem domains where there's multiple ways to get from beginning to end. And so the tool may or may not do what you want. So the classic one is rename, right? If I rename something, a begin and end view of that is drop and add, correct? Right. Which isn't what we want in tables.
Right. Because you have to drop the whole thing. Oh, you have to save the data, right? And then you have to drop it, and then you have to recreate it and then move the data back over, right?
And so some tools recognize a rename. Yeah. Right. Some tools will actually save that data off into a temp table, and then they'll create a new table, and then they'll move that data, and then they'll drop the old table, right? Which is okay, except if it's 1 billion rows, that's time consuming, right? If it's 100 rows, nobody cares, right? And so there's classes of those problems, like there's splits, there's merges, there's renames, there's default or not null new columns. There's a bunch of different types of problems where you can't necessarily trust the tool to do that. And so there is some expertise needed.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with the tools that work like that, which is how database projects in Microsoft work. It's how SQL Compare works. It's how some things work. You just have to be aware when you've hit one of those places where I can cause myself problems.
Right.
The other method is really what Entity Framework does, or what at Redgate we own Flyway. We do this migrations method so that as you make those changes in development, we just track all those scripts.
Right.
And so there's script 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera. And then when we go to deploy, we just run all those scripts.
Right.
And that works great. The problem with that is that the information in those scripts is a little bit hidden. And so if I were to do a merge of work from two developers, it can be confusing, right? Because I'm essentially seeing these differently named script files, or potentially I'm seeing two that are named the same that have disparate, completely different code. And so merges, just like they might be in the application software world, are really hard on developers. Right. The other problem is the same thing, right? That you may, add a column, drop a column, add another column. I don't necessarily want to do that in production, especially at scale.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So managing that workload is a challenge. And so I really haven't seen ideal solutions from anybody. But what a lot of tools have done at Redgate and other places is try to give you more insight and warning into what you're actually doing so that you can decide if it makes sense. And then we make it really easy for you to do that stuff so that you can run CI, or I can run it into a test environment and go, was that a dumb idea, or does it work fine?
Right.
Right. And hopefully get an idea also of timing, because change takes time in the database world. And so you might not have an hour to make a change, or you might need to split things up across time to do that.
Right. Oh, and one thing I was thinking about when you talk about that is, because I think I've had to do this on a project or two, and try to change the data type of a column.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. That's pretty hard to do. And unfortunately, that's because databases are so hard this is so hard in databases that, a lot of databases that I end up seeing have a lot of problems in it that you just can't change, or they don't know how to change them, right?
Well, or they don't want to take the time. Like I think
take the time and the
so data type
money.
issues often come because of poor modeling, but
Right.
that's just a reality. Because when we build something, we don't always have the information, right? Somebody tells us, I really need this month. And then a year later, we realize, we should have done something different. To me, what we've done is we've lost patience. So the way that we would do these things in Oracle, right? If you look at old DB2 or old Oracle years ago, is we would create a new column and we would move stuff there. And we would use triggers to sync that. And we would then rev our app code to move from column A to column B. And then at some point in time, we would yank column A, we would drop it, and everything would be pointing to B.
Right.
That's the pattern, right? That's how Azure DevOps does stuff, is they rev that system. They certainly change columns and they rev it across time. But too often we get impatient. We want to do this big bang release where I want to add column, I just want to change the data type, or I want to add column B and drop column A all at once, which is just crazy.
Yeah.
That we don't just have patience and go, let's do this across 2 or 3 deployments. Some of that is we're scared of database deployments, so we want to do as few as possible.
Yeah.
Rather than go, hey, let's release every week. So if we have twice as much data for 2 weeks, it's not the end of the world.
Right.
Because in 2 weeks we can just go, we've revved everything and let's kill it.
Yeah.
And that's really, we're good at that with DevOps for the app code, right? Python, Java, C#, whatever. We're not so good with that, the database code. But if we did a little more of that, I think we'd find flexibility in what we do.
Yeah.
But also it means, right, that the ETL team has to be aligned. The data warehouse team they have to be willing to make changes in a short period of time, days, weeks, months, to keep up with those changes. And that's hard to get in an organization, right? I'm sure you as a consultant, right? Sometimes it's hard to convince other people to go, let's march and get through this stuff and get rid of technical debt and let's make it better. But
technical debt seems to last a lot longer than we ever wanted to, right?
It does, right? It really does.
Because of the time and money to fix it, right? One company I worked at, we had, when we learned how to do Agile, which they screwed up, of course, but that they use that as like the black hole of, we don't want to do it now. Let's put it in technical debt. And guess what? That never got worked on ever. Right. So that was like the black hole of, we're not going to do that, basically.
And I think that's the difference between the companies you read about, Google, Spotify, all these DevOps companies, Capital One, and most companies, right? Because those companies, they clean up technical debt, right? Like at Redgate, we call, a series of sprints a train. And so out of every 8 cars in a train, or every 8 sprints, one of those is killing technical debt. Right. So that, I don't know if we're doing 2 or 3 weeks now, but so every 16 or 24 weeks, we take an 1/8 of that and go, let's clean up something that is a mess.
Yeah. That's why I've written an article about this, where I think that, at least every Friday afternoon should be just goofing. I don't want to use the word goofing around, but just doing those kind of things like that, or learning something new, or because you never release on Fridays, right? I don't know how many people still do that, which is crazy. You don't release on Fridays or Mondays, right? That's Wednesdays are perfect, right? And
right? I mean, I used to release on Fridays, and we did Friday nights here in Denver because APAC is offline. They don't come on till Sunday. Yeah. Right. And most of the US is gone by Friday night. So for us, it was actually a good time to release.
Yeah.
But not so good for us technical people, right?
Yeah. And that's, and as, as our world changes, that gets harder and harder because, when we start, like I was talking to someone yesterday about this company I used to work for, and, we only basically serviced, people in America and Canada. So we definitely had our downtimes, which were the evenings, right? That we knew nobody was really on the system and we could do major changes like that. But as we move more towards a global world, and even my new job is totally global, right? how do you do that, right? Because you're constantly being hit. There is no downtime, right?
No. And that's where, like I said, right, like trading space for time,
Yeah.
doing an extra thing that you'll fix in a little bit of time makes that an online change.
Yeah.
Right. And it gives you time to catch up things. And certainly I think the addition and management of feature flags in the app code become huge, because if I have to roll forward or back the database, or roll forward or back the app, I should be able to do that within a version one way or the other.
Right.
And so the more that I think that we learn to adopt those things, the more that we have flexibility to rev the database and fix technical debt in there. And then we have to test better, right? Like, I'm sure you've gotten big on unit testing in the .NET world, right? And I think that's what's made these things reliable in the last 10 years, is that a ton of unit testing. You can do the same thing in a database. And I talk about that often when I give talks or talk to customers, that testing really gives you a safety net to say, can I rev this code without breaking something?
Right. And yeah, testing the database has always been difficult. And I actually was talking to someone this week about this, because, I'm going to start, one of the reasons or the reason they hired me at this new company was, they have some pretty legacy stuff that's been around for, 20 years, and they want to start moving it into the cloud. And so that means a big architecture shift, right? And I've been thinking a lot about not only shifting the code, but how do we shift the data too? Right. And so, how do we move the data into the cloud and take advantage of the cloud in a proper way? And now I forget where I was going with that, but it's databases have always been hard, and that's why I've always tried to make sure I either hire or work with really good, DBAs or DevOps people, because that's where they are an expert at. I am not, right. And and when I tell people, that, they say, so one of my pet peeves, I'm sure everybody's heard me either write or speak about this, is developers should not be should be designing databases, right? We don't know what we're doing for the most part, right? We're dangerous. I mean, we know enough to be dangerous, but we really don't know what you do, you know, right? And hiring somebody, like you to come into a company, to me, is always worth whatever money you want, because it's such an important thing. And too many teams rely, well, we'll just have the developer do it. No, stop doing that, because then you're going to be left in a mess, which I see most databases in, right?
I agree. At the same time, there's a lot of database people that get hung up on the waterfall method, right? I need the requirements. We got to model it perfectly. And that's just not a realistic consideration these days. So database, either developers have to learn more about modeling and make smarter choices for the future, or database people have to be more flexible and move forward, right? And I think that's where a lot of people have adopted these NoSQL databases, so document databases, graph databases, key value, whatever. And then they get into trouble later because they think that it's super flexible and I can do it. But what you're really doing in this flexible schema stuff is you're putting the technical debt in C# or in Java, not a database then, right? Because if I alter the JSON schema or anything else, I've got to maintain code that can read the old and new schemas across time, which all I've done is kick the problem to a different place. Right. And so I think I don't love document databases, but I see there's a niche of places where those work really well. I think more relational databases solve a ton of problems, except streaming and graph. Like those databases, they solve specific problems, and you got to just use that thing. Right. And things like Redis for speed caching stuff, phenomenal, right?
Oh yeah,
but
Redis.
For a lot of our data store, when we deal with singletons, anything works, right? Like I could use text files, I could use document, Cosmos, whatever, Mongo. But once I start to do aggregations or pull stuff back, then it becomes a little more complex and it's harder. And like I work with WordPress because we run SQL Server Central WordPress, and it's maddening to me. Like certain changes are impossible because everything is stuffed into a string field that has JSON in it. And you go, I just want to change like my username, but it's in now 8 million documents.
Right.
And it's a resource problem, right? Just making a change is a resource issue.
Yeah.
So I agree with you. We need good modeling, but it has to be agile and fast as well.
Well, that kind of brings me to one of the questions I wrote down to ask you is, what do you think the future of document databases are? Like, do you see them just as a sidecar per se to SQL Server, or do you see companies, especially since you talk to a lot of companies, do you see companies going, okay, we see the advantages of maybe document-based databases. Should we start moving over to that instead of SQL Server? Have you seen any of that? Yeah.
Well, so what I'd say is that for interactive application stuff, right? I think the document database or document type databases become really valuable because they are flexible and speedy. But at some point, somebody's going to want to suck that information out and report on it, aggregate it.
Yeah. So more of the data warehouse thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And so the challenge becomes then, do we do some type of ETL thing? Will Synapse Link become a thing? Right? The Synapse Link thing from Cosmos is fantastic because it pulls that stuff over very quickly. I think that what you're going to find with document databases in general is that as a pseudo temporary store, they're fantastic for applications.
Hands down, I think they are.
Hands down, right? Like their scalability and all that stuff. But where they become problematic is that as you grow beyond a smaller application, you end up doing a lot of data repetition because I need to
you have to because you're not relational anymore.
Because I need an index. So I'm really pivoting and twisting the schema around. And so I'm creating a different kind of technical debt. So what I really think is there's a time and place for these different types of stores. So I am seeing from customers a lot more multi-data store applications. So commonly they will use either a NoSQL class of database, document, graph, whatever, or a relational database. In addition, they will use an Elasticsearch, a Redis to give them some different capabilities. So they've duplicated data there. And then they'll use either a relational database as a warehouse or a data lake, warehouse type of system that handles that, because we have all those different needs, and it becomes important that we meet those needs. The hard part then is a development environment, right? Because now the developer has to run 7 things, or just trying to keep those things in line. As we add features to one, can we add it to the next one? So really, I think most cases, the relational database is the core store you ought to use, but you should supplement that, right? Like Elasticsearch is great because full text search in Oracle or SQL Server syncs, right? Lucerne, Elasticsearch, whatever. Trying to do high speed stuff, Redis is better for a lot of caching, but if I'm doing something like Xbox Live or somewhere, I can see why document database or key value store makes a lot more sense because it scales, right? And it's semi-transient data, right? Like it has to survive power outages, but really it's going to change so rapidly and be read so rapidly that we don't need a hard schema on that stuff. We don't need a lot of indexes. So I suspect a lot more of us, you have to learn containers because you're going to end up running 3 data stores on your laptop with your compiler and VS Code, right? So you have to know containers is really what I think. But the relational database is not going away. It's just it's too powerful and prevalent, and it's a good store, long-term store for a lot of our data.
I don't see NoSQL databases being very good for data warehousing for sure.
No.
I do this. So we could talk about this a little bit because I was talking about this week, and that is, one of the inherent issues. So one of the things I've been preaching for a very long time is you have to get the processing of the data as close to the end user as possible, right? Because of the freaking internet, because the internet will always be your biggest bottleneck. I don't care what anybody says, that's what it is. And so you have to get that as close to your user as you can. So hosting servers here in America and dealing with users in Singapore, that's going to really suck for them, right? And so you want to get the data and the processing in Singapore. So one of the problems, at least with, like SQL Server type databases is that how do you replicate databases like that has always been inherently difficult, if not impossible, with SQL Server and things like that. So one of the questions I had is, does Azure, SQL Azure make that any easier, or do you still have the same replication issues if you want to do multi-data regions with like a SQL Server database?
It makes it easier because they handle some of the complex administrative stuff you would do for infrastructure, right? So they'll do readable secondary stuff around the world if you want to do that. Some of the availability scrub is good. It still pales in comparison to things like Cosmos, where I can let consistency fall away a little bit, or even sharding, where I can go, I only want to move portions of data to different places, because I think the problem with the relational database sometimes is we're trying to move all this data and go, we need all this data in Australia, but we don't really need all this data in Australia, because really it's us analysts at headquarters that have to see all the data, but a portion of data being somewhere else, I think, is more valuable. But Microsoft, Oracle, everybody's working on better solutions to, in essence, shard out a portion of data somewhere and keep that piece in sync with your central warehouse or your central relational database, without having to move all that data back and forth. Because, I mean, face it, for a lot of the stuff that we interact with as customers, we're really looking for a tiny amount of data. Amazon doesn't have to move all the data around, right? I care about my stuff in North America, right? People in Australia care about their stuff in the UK. So really, I think they do a good job of kind of being more of a SOA architecture, right? Where they're moving pieces around and they're allowing consistency to drift, knowing that we don't really care, right? Like, for any individual customer, it doesn't matter. At some point, we warehouse this stuff together in a relational database or a data lake to go, let's actually report on it. And I think the cloud providers make that amazing. Now, they love you to use document databases because you pay more for storage, because you got
a heck of a lot more storage.
You got to duplicate it. So the cloud, I think, is inevitable for most of us in some way, because, right, most of us don't maintain our own wells, right? Like, we don't maintain our own cars. That's where the cloud is going. We don't want to maintain a lot of stuff.
Yeah. And we want it to be easy. And that's
easy.
And that's one of the really big pluses with something like Cosmos DB, is that, I mean, to replicate that thing, all you do is check a checkbox. I mean, basically, and that's it. Azure does.
Credit card, though.
Yeah, well, and the credit card, but basically, Azure takes care of the whole thing, right? You don't really have much to do with it.
No, but you are seeing people that now have to rethink their Cosmos and re-architect how they store the data, because they do see costs go up. And every once in a while, like, you really need to understand your problem domain, because that consistency can cause a problem if you go too loose. Right. So I think the default is keeping things in order in different regions, and that works really well for most people. But if you try to crank that down to not being in order, that sometimes causes you problems.
Yeah. Right? And cost is the number one thing I hear from people about Cosmos DB. And I don't know what the way it is on like AWS right now or anything, but that's always the number one thing I hear. And from people, why they haven't moved to Cosmos DB is the cost. So I hope, Microsoft, if you're listening, you need to work on the cost, because I think, if you lower the cost, you might get a heck of a lot more income, because more people will start using it. That's my feeling.
Yeah. Well, I think, Dave, we know, right? Everything runs better if you write good code.
Right.
Sure. And everything runs better if you model better. And so that's, I think, where a lot of people are finding, because I do see people that have, like, they pay literally tens of dollars to run a database service a month, because they've written good code and it performs and it scales really well.
Right.
And the Cosmos thing, I think, it's really tough to estimate your request units, because that's a very weird concept for us to think about. And as our data grows, the request units go up, because the request unit is a 1 kilobyte point read.
Right.
So if I have a 10 kilobyte document, it's 10 RUs, right? But if it goes to 100 kilobytes, it's bigger. And so that's a challenging thing for us, I think, to understand that. And then, like, when you get to Synapse, like, you can run serverless there, but then you're billed by data processed, right? So what streams off disk into the query processor, not what returns to the customer, that's a crazy metric. Like, I don't even know how to think about that metric.
Yeah. And you were talking about, doing data warehouses, ETLs. So are there any tools out there now that make it, like, relatively easy to move something like from a NoSQL database into a relational database for data warehousing?
So I'm not really a data warehouse expert. I have been looking at the Synapse Link, which I think is phenomenal, right? They had that for Cosmos and Dataverse last year. They just added it, or I think they're adding it soon to Azure SQL Database. And essentially what they're going to do is build a column structure over a column index over your data, right? Whether it's in Cosmos or relational. And then they're going to kind of pull that index across so that you can access in the data warehouse immediately. And so I think it doesn't sound like a super efficient thing, and it might not be cost effective from the Azure billing standpoint, but from the labor of developers and ETL people and stuff, I think it starts to become huge, right? Because, I know people that were paying, $40,000 a month in data center costs, and it went to $90,000 in Azure, but they had 2 less people managing that stuff.
Yeah. So that's a big savings right there.
It's a big savings, So their total estimate was that while it's $90,000 a month in Azure, right, we're not $300,000 in labor and benefits and people building stuff, right? Yeah. So I think it's really tough to decide what makes the most sense. Hopefully, people like you and me just keep trying stuff, and then we can talk about it and go, this is what has worked in this area. And we share the knowledge.
Yeah. I mean, that's why we're here, right? That's we're the ones that bang our heads against the table and then hopefully share what we learned out to everybody else, so they don't have to bang their heads against the table, right?
Right.
I've been banging I used to be a old headbanger back in the 80s, right? So I know how that works. That's why my neck is screwed up, I think.
There you go.
No, it's actually my work. It's probably mostly why my neck is screwed up. But you know what? We're getting close to the end of time, and we only talked about one thing. So we're going to have you back on. The one thing that I thought about one of the times when you were talking, and just because this is a pet peeve for me, even though I'm the bad speller, it really irritates me having bad misspelled code, right? And one of the things I say about that is, once you do a misspelled property or something like that, and once that goes into production, it's really, really hard to change, right? Yeah. And especially how long that happens before you actually get to change it. So, I've seen the same issues in databases, right? Where I have seen, very poorly misspelled, things in databases, and then it's impossible to change, So one of the questions I ask, just because I just don't know, is does Redgate or somebody else actually have a program where you can spell check your columns and things like that?
So we don't have a spell check per se, right? Because you think about spell check when we name things, right? Pascal, camel case, whatever. A lot of times we're combining some things together.
Yeah.
What I would say is, DevOps helps us because I can deploy frequently. I could rename a column and we could rename it in app code easily, right? Now, for you in VS Code or Visual Studio or Eclipse or whatever, you could probably do a search and replace across your code base and say, every time I saw, first T name, because I added a T in there, you just replace that with first name, right?
Right.
At Redgate, we have something in SQL prompt. There is a feature, Smart Rename, that'll flip through the database and rename everything. But to deploy that, the key is I've got to drop that stuff in version control as well so that I know what's going out. And so I'm a huge proponent of version control for databases. Our last surveys, we do a huge state of database DevOps every year. We see just over 50% of database people doing that, whereas we see 90% of app code people doing that.
Yeah. I'm surprised it's that high with databases. Actually.
Yeah, it's grown. It used to be about 30%. I think it was under 30% when I started 12 years ago at this, but it's gotten up to about, I think 52 or 53 was last year's number. But getting that in version control means we can do that same kind of search and replace.
Right.
And then SQL prompt will help you do it in dev databases. But then I've got to use some tool, right? I've got to generate a script that says deploy all this stuff out and coordinate it with app code, which means I need CI, right? So that I test it appropriately with the app code. I need an automated deployment so that I get every script that's needed, and every piece of app code has to go out together so that we don't break stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And so really, I think that's where going to a flexible database DevOps process to go, we know we can deploy every day if we need to. If we have to rename something that's misspelled, let's just rename it.
Yeah.
Right. And do we just fix it in a bunch of places? And if we've got that in our ETL in our warehouse, then we just go, hey, you guys need to deploy the same thing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then it becomes much easier.
Yeah.
The other thing is that's where testing comes into place. We've started to build some code analysis stuff for SQL Server and Oracle, and help you find some of those problems. Like you would use a linter typically in app code to look for problems like that, standard issues, code smells. We're trying to build that in the database world. I think there's a few other companies as well. So really, I think we're trying to catch up with the maturity of you as a software.NET developer that databases haven't had.
Yeah. Yeah. One comment you made that we'll have to talk about on a different show I really liked was, if you have good developers and you have, good design code and, stuff like that, then you don't need as many people. Right. And they remind me of my last contract that I was on that, our team was I would say at least 3 times bigger than it should be. I was the largest single team I've ever worked on, and it was because of that, right? Yeah. They just had so many not good developers and not good decisions and not good architecture that they basically have to have all these people to overcome that technical debt kind of, and therefore they're paying a heck of a lot of money, for those developers. Even if they're contractors, you're still paying a lot more money.
And you're only solving a portion of that problem, right? Like the mythical man month is still there.
Yeah.
Right. That's still an issue in computer science.
Yeah. Always. Yeah.
So, hey, I'd love to come back and talk. I think maybe when you come back from Australia, we can get on and chat again.
Well, I definitely, I could not run out of questions for the next hour about database stuff, just because I'm not a database expert, Right. I admit it. And, but I would like to have you back on, and sure. Everybody on the chat, let me know or email me that I'd love to have you back on and talk about branding yourself.
Sure. Right? I'd love to.
That's always super important, especially when you're looking for a new job. And I know everybody knows I have a brand, but most people don't, right? And so how do you create that, and how do you create your persona that will get you that next job that you really want, right?
Yeah, I've been doing talks on that. I've been lucky in life. I've been successful like you have. I've been doing talks on that at various SQL Saturdays and other events for a decade now. So I'd love to come back and chat with you some point in time.
Yeah, that's great. I think actually one of the SQL Saturdays, last ones I did here in San Diego, I didn't even talk about databases. I did my How to Survive the Technical Interview talk, which is based off of one of my books. And that's if I speak at like a SQL Saturday, that's usually what I do now, because I really don't do a lot of database stuff anymore.
Well, if we get SQL Saturday San Diego, you can come do that talk again. We'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'll be glad to. Before you go, I always have 2 things. So is there anything you want to plug before you go?
Yeah, so I will say, SQLSaturday.com, we're starting to get events going again. So we've got a few scheduled. Actually, I have one in Nepal in October that I'm trying to, my wife and I are trying to convince we want to take vacation and go to Nepal and speak. But we're SQLSaturday.com. Yeah.
Because we're thinking about doing the next CSharpCorner conference in October.
Yeah.
Right. Simon, you can put the date. You can tell me what the date is real quick if you want. But yeah, so I wonder if they line up. That'd be great if they come.
Yeah. So I'm excited. My wife is interested. So I think we're just trying to figure out flights and all that stuff and go. Yeah. But SQL Saturday, we're trying to get those going again, and free technical events so that we get together and network and get inspired and all that stuff. And then the other thing I would say is the Redgate bought the assets of the former PASS organization for SQL Server pros and data pros. We are going to run the Data Community Summit this November in Seattle. Microsoft's going to be there with hundreds of people as well. So if you're interested in data, BI, that kind of stuff, the conference is going to be hybrid, but there's a live option if you'd like to come to Seattle or watch online.
Go to Seattle. I love visiting Seattle. Yeah. I love eating the fresh fish up there. We don't get that here. So it's one of my favorite things. And excuse me, before you go, what do you like to do for fun that's not database work?
So like you, I play guitar, but I'm kind of a hack, right? I do a little bit of that. But the last few years, my kids have all grown up now.
Mhm.
My daughter was a big volleyball player throughout high school, and now she plays in college. But my wife and I actually coach competitive volleyball,
Oh,
through half the year. So we're coming to the end of our season. I was in Las Vegas last weekend to coach a tournament, and I got to get up early tomorrow. I got to drive up north of Denver to coach for a day, and so I got about
yeah.
3 weeks left. So it's a great hobby for me to just hang out with kids now that my kids are all gone.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, I was when I had to do like volleyball in school, they always put me at the net because I'm so freaking tall.
Yeah,
All I did was put my hand up and block I didn't even have to jump,
yeah,
because I'm 6'4". So,
yeah,
that's what you use the tall guy for, the
yeah,
block the
exactly,
shots, right?
exactly.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on. We'll definitely have you back on.
My pleasure.
Everybody listening right now, make sure you let me know if you want Steve back on. But I'm going to have him back on anyway. I don't care what you say.
Yeah.
So, but I still would like to know how much you like this talk, and if you would like to talk about the branding and also other free events like SQL Saturday and things like that. So thanks a lot. So thanks so much for being on the show. I hope you have a great rest of the weekend. I hope your family is doing great, and I can't wait to talk to you next time.
Thanks,
Hopefully
Dave.
someday
Same
in
to you.
person. Hopefully someday in person.
Yes, exactly.
All right, cool.
All right.
Thanks.
Cheers, everyone.
Thanks. Oh, that was a great talk. I think all my talks are great, but I love the ones where I actually learn some stuff, especially now that, like I was alluding to, I'm going to have to be re-architecting these projects for this company. How we're going to deal with the database stuff really is on top of my mind, of course. As Simon told me that the C# conference right now is scheduled for October 10th, and that's not been announced yet. I guess we're announcing it now, sort of, kind of. And the SQL Saturday in Nepal is October 8th. So maybe we can go to Nepal first and then go to Delhi for the conference, and then we can hang out with the SQL Saturday people. Who knows? Well, anyway, I got to go because I've run out of time already. Don't forget, most of my code performance book is now available online. If you go to that URL right there, you can check it out. Some are free, some are not free. I got to save up for retirement, so I hope you'll pay the $4.99 a month, and I read some of the performance stuff I do, because it takes me a long time to do those things, and I want to retire as fast as possible. So so I can just do stuff like this all day and not work an actual full-time job. As every week, everybody wins a copy of Code Rush from DevExpress, my favorite code refactoring tool, even though they took out the disassembler. Go to devexpress.com/dotNetDave and download your free copy of Code Rush right now. It's a free real copy. It's not stripped down or anything. And that's what I use for refactoring. And a lot of people don't realize that these refactoring tools actually teach you better ways of coding too. So if your company pays for it, it's worth the first day you use it, it'll be worth it. So also, don't forget, my coding standards book is out there. I hope you'll get it. Every company I'll work at needs it, even my current one, even though they do a lot better job of standards than the contracts I've been on lately. They still do a lot of common coding mistakes, which are all in my book. So I hope I'm going to try to convince my boss to get every .NET developer where I work, I don't know how many we have, a copy of that, just so we can have a consistent standard across the company. Also, I'm still raising money for the kids in India. No one's donated this past week or so. So I hope you go to that URL right there or scan that and help me raise money for the kids. A couple weeks ago, I donated almost $500 through this to the Voice of Slum, which they use to help the kids in the orphanage from the slums in India, which I visited in 2019. And I'm really looking forward to hopefully going back this year when I visit India. I want to see how my money's been used since I've been away. All right, thanks for watching. There's a couple events coming up in the next couple of weeks, so I won't actually have a show the next 2 weeks. because Simon will be off doing other things. Yeah, sorry, Simon, I blamed you again. But my next show will be Mika Dumont from Microsoft. I'm really excited to get her on the show. I think she's in the Visual Studio team, so I'm really looking forward to that in 2 weeks. So we'll be off for 2 weeks. I'll be resting and doing my own thing. And also, please make sure you listen to your medical professionals about COVID. We kind of talked a little bit about today, where we're not over it completely, and there's some spikes coming up. And so be careful. I got my second booster shot yesterday, what I'm really happy about. But please be safe. Also, go donate blood at your local blood bank. All the blood banks are in shortages right now. And I tried to donate last Sunday, which is the day I usually donate, but I was turned down again because my iron was 1 point under their minimum, which they have a high minimum where I go. And so I'm doing a lot of work right now to try to get my iron up so I can donate next Sunday. So, but you don't, hopefully you don't have that problem. So please go donate. And if you donate and you have a US address and you tweet me about it, I will definitely send you some swag because I have a lot to give away in my house, including books. So donate, post your donation on Twitter, tag me, and I'll send you some stuff. US address only, sorry. It costs way too much money to send a book to India, I found out recently. All right. Also, don't forget to send me suggestions, who you want to come on the show, what topics you want me to cover, what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, to Rockin The Code World at CSharpCorner.com. And with that, I'll see you in 3 weeks.